So we're still talking about homeostasis. And we're going to talk next about the ability of organisms to transport things within themselves, because that's crucial. Right? Almost every body system that we talk about also requires a circulatory system. The digestive system needs the circulatory system. Digestion breaks down nutrients, but then to get them everywhere, they have to go through a circulatory system. The endocrine system we just talked about. The hormones that are produced in the endocrine system need to go into the blood to get to all of the body's tissues. Talk about the respiratory system. We breathe in air, but then it's up to the circulatory system to actually transport that oxygen throughout the body. So basically, every single system needs the circulatory system. Sort of ties them all together. And so the circulatory system in humans is what we're going to focus on, is what's called a closed circulatory system. Some animals have an open circulatory system, like insects. Like the blood is just kind of surrounding all of their tissues. It's not in vessels. It's not contained. Just sort of all throughout their body cavity. Humans have a closed circulatory system. Our blood is always in blood vessels. And our heart is a four-chambered circulatory organ. It has four separate chambers to take in and pump blood. And we'll talk about those chambers and what they do. Attached to the heart are arteries and veins and capillaries, things that we call blood vessels. And then filling those blood vessels in the heart is our blood. Our blood is a fluid. It's a mixture of different things. We'll talk about that. And so our circulatory system has a lot of different jobs to do. Obviously, it has to distribute nutrients, oxygen, carbon dioxide, hormones throughout our body. But also our circulatory system is important in fighting infection. Our immune system works within our circulatory system partially. It helps seal up any damage by our blood clotting. It also is important in distributing heat throughout our body. So it has other jobs to do as well. Anybody get these references? Upper right-hand corner? No? Have you ever seen this movie?
Oh, like Indiana Jones or something?
Yeah, Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom.
No, I haven't seen that one.
He pulls the guy's heart out of his chest. He's holding a heart. How about this one, lower left-hand corner? No one's going to get that one. That's a band called Heart.
Oh, that was Beetlejuice.
Oh, that's not very nice.
Like the movie view?
All right. If we consider our blood, really our blood is mostly water. We call the liquid part of our blood the plasma. It's about 55% of our blood. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. If you look at that other stuff, most of that is red blood cells. There's also some white blood cells and some platelets. That's what makes up our blood. And like we had a blood drive here at school. I know you guys couldn't do it. You're too young still. But we had a blood drive at school last week. And so when you donate blood, you go and they took a little test of your blood to see if you have enough iron. They ask you a whole bunch of questions, and then you go sit on a table, and they basically put a little needle into a vein in your arm, and then they allow blood to drain out about a liter or so, I guess. No, it's not a liter.
Does it make it feel any different?
No, they don't feel any different. And then in the bag, you see the blood, and it looks just like this red liquid. But what they can do then is take that blood, and they can separate the different parts. They can take the red blood cells out and give those to people that need that. They can take the plasma and the white blood cells. So they can separate it, or they can just use it as whole blood, which is all of those things combined. So the liquid part of the blood is called the plasma. It looks like, if it's separated, this is what it looks like. Or on the other side, that yellowish kind of part, that's the blood plasma. Most of it's water, but there's other things dissolved in it. And it kind of carries the rest of the parts of the blood within it. It's kind of like a river, and floating in that river is all the different other parts of the blood. And also, this is where most of the carbon dioxide gets dissolved. We know that we talked about muscle fatigue and waste products of respiration. Carbon dioxide is constantly being built up. And if it builds up to levels that are too high, it can become dangerous. So it dissolves, moves into our blood plasma, where we can then get rid of it by exhaling it. Okay. Red blood cells, I'm sure you're familiar with. This is what red blood cells look like, separated out. Red blood cells look like a flattened disc sort of shape. You can see them there. And red blood cells' main job is to carry oxygen. This is where oxygen dissolves. It attaches to special proteins in the red blood cells. They also carry some carbon dioxide. One interesting thing about red blood cells is they don't have any nucleus. They're cells without a nucleus. They're just little structures that they're adapted to just carrying oxygen. They have in them a special protein called hemoglobin. That's what actually binds to the oxygen. Hemoglobin has iron in it. This is why you need iron in your diet. If you've ever been kind of tired and maybe went to the doctor, they might test your blood to see if you have the proper level of iron. If not, it's called being anemic if you don't have enough iron or not enough red blood cells, because it means your tissues in your body aren't getting enough oxygen, and therefore they can't produce enough energy. So the symptoms might be being tired, being fatigued, etc. We have a lot of red blood cells. Okay, 5 million just in a tiny little milliliter of blood. And they're created in our bone marrow. So red blood cells actually are made within our bones, especially our long bones, your femur, okay, your humerus. Inside is this material called marrow, and that's where these blood cells are actually produced. There's also these little parts. If you look at blood under a microscope, you see these things. These are stained, and those are something called platelets. They're not really cells. They're parts of cells. They're smaller than red blood cells and white blood cells. And what they do is their job is to basically form blood clots. Is it good to form blood clots, or is it bad to form blood clots?
Depends.
Right. Depends on what?
Like if you have an injury.
So when is your blood, so what that means, clotting, is these platelets, which are these white things, kind of clumping together. When is that good and helpful?
When you're losing blood.
Yeah, if you have some sort of damage, if you have a cut, right, it wouldn't be helpful to just continue bleeding. So when you do get a cut, when there's damage to a blood vessel, these platelets start to clump together. That's what you're seeing here. There's damage to this blood vessel. These platelets are starting to attach together and clump, and they're going to kind of seal that off. Your blood clotting is why you stop bleeding if you get a cut. So that's good. You have to stop bleeding. Well, when is a blood clot bad?
When it travels to your lung.
Yeah, if they form when they shouldn't. So sometimes these platelets, for some reason, there's no damage, but they form clots. They clump together. And if those clump together platelets travel throughout your body, if they get lodged somewhere, that can be dangerous. Right? They could cut off the flow of blood to your brain or your heart or your lungs and cause serious problems. So in those situations, then a blood clot is dangerous. It's called a thrombus. Blood platelets are also found or they're produced, I should say, in the bone marrow, like the red blood cells, and they require vitamin K as one of their for their production. So that's why we need that vitamin in our diet.
How do you get rid of the blood clot if you have it?
It depends. Sometimes you can be given medication which stops your blood from clotting as much.
Blood thinners?
Yeah, sometimes they're called blood thinners, statins. But those, what's one of the downsides of taking something like that?
Bleed faster.
Yeah, if you are on a blood thinner, is what like commonly we call those in your blood, so it reduces your blood clotting. If you do get a cut or something, it can bleed more than it otherwise should. Or people that are on those sort of medications, they bruise very easily because a bruise is just bleeding under your skin, really. Some people are born with a genetic disease when their blood doesn't clot properly. It's called hemophilia. And that could be due to lack of platelets, but it's a genetic disorder. This is one that sort of not popped up, but became common in the royal families of Europe in, I don't even know the time span, in
Russia,
Russia and the Tsars, and this was in one like the 1700s? I don't know, kind of guessing. Did you learn this in some class this year?
Yeah, Mrs. Hamilton was talking about it.
And you don't remember?
No, there was this kid. His name was the Rasputin.
Well, he wasn't a kid.
I know
He was a
Rasputin
monk.
with like a certain family.
Yeah. The Romanovs.
Yes.
So anyway,
Oh yeah.
why did this become a problem in these royal families of Europe? You know? Well, but why did it start to become more common? Like it's a relatively rare disorder.
Because they like reproduce with each other.
Yeah, because there was a constant like these royal families would try to marry their children to other royal families, and so you had like a relatively small group of people where you had cousins marrying, and so when you have those close relatives actually marrying or having children, it can lead to certain genetic diseases becoming more likely because there's less, it's a shallower gene pool, we might say. And so this popped up in these royal families, and they actually tried to hide it because they didn't want other royal families to know, oh, we have a child that has hemophilia, because no one else from other prestigious families would want to have that child as married to their children. So it became an issue. And so, anyway, that's sort of hemophilia. So you can tell Ms. Hamilton that we connected science to
She'll be very happy.
to Sue social
Don't forget
studies.
that
Yeah. White blood cells. What do white blood cells do for us?
They fight off infections.
They do. They're our immune system, or a big portion of our immune system. They're floating around in our blood. They could come out of our blood to go fight infections and so forth. But white blood cells are our immune system. These have nuclei in them, sometimes more than one, actually. They're about the same size. Sometimes they can be bigger than red blood cells. We see them in this diagram here, these white things compared to the red blood cells. There's lots of types of white blood cells. We're not going to get into the details, but our immune system is really complex. How our immune system works is complex, but it reacts to, our immune system reacts to what it thinks are foreign invading cells, things that we would call pathogens. Okay. And when our immune system recognizes something and it says, this should not be in our body, this is something foreign, then our immune system attacks it. And white blood cells will destroy it. Antibodies can be produced to help protect in the future as well. And we can see that. These orange cells you see are bacteria. This is a bacterial infection. And then the yellow cells you see are part of our our immune system, engulfing and destroying those bacteria cells. You can see some examples of that. All right. So let's talk about our. So we talked about our blood. Let's talk about our heart. Our heart has 4 chambers to it, and we kind of divide our heart into 2 sides: the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart. The right side of the heart is the side that receives. Here's what I found. Deoxygenated blood. What does that mean? What does deoxygenated mean?
Like no oxygen.
It's given up, yes, it's blood that's already given its oxygen to different tissues in our body. That blood goes into our heart on the right side. The left side of our heart is the side that deals with oxygenated blood. In our circulatory system, the 2 types of blood are kept separate. We never have mixing of deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood. Other animals do. Fish, for example. They just have a 2-chambered heart. So the blood that has oxygen doesn't have, it's always being mixed together. It's not as efficient. But this is a model of our heart. This is a little big, but our heart's a muscle, right? It's a complex group of muscles and nervous tissue. And it constantly has to be. If our heart stops, then we can't survive very long. Why can't we survive very long if our heart stops? Like, what actually would cause a person to die if their heart stops?
No oxygen,
To
like cells.
Yeah, so it stops the delivery of blood through the whole body, and therefore cells don't have oxygen, and therefore they can't survive. Cells cannot survive for very long if they don't have oxygen. So if our heart stops beating, our blood stops delivering oxygen, and our cells can't survive. But our heart itself, it needs oxygen. The heart muscle, even though it's filled up with blood, it doesn't actually get oxygen from that blood. It has its own blood vessels on the outside. We could see them here. They sort of surround the heart tissue. They're really important. If these get clogged, we'll talk about that. They need to be fixed, and we'll talk about how that happens eventually. But the heart muscle, you should know, is supplied by these special arteries called coronary arteries. They supply blood to the heart itself. Our blood pressure is something that's measured, like probably anytime you go to the doctor, probably once a year, and they probably measure your blood pressure when you go. When I donated blood last week, they took your blood pressure first. They put the cup on you, pump it up. We'll try to measure our blood pressure tomorrow, see if we can do it. Sometimes challenging. But blood pressure is every time your heart beats, it's forcing blood into your blood vessels. And that exerts pressure on them. And that's what you're measuring when you're measuring blood pressure. How much force is the blood exerting on our blood vessels? Because if it's too much, it can be dangerous. Blood pressure that's too high can damage organs. There's too much pressure on those blood vessels. Low blood pressure can also be dangerous. Low blood pressure could cause you to feel faint, could cause you to pass out because the pressure in your arteries is not enough to get blood to your brain. Sometimes if you ever bent down and picked something up, you got up really fast and you feel like lightheaded, or maybe you could even pass out, that's because your blood pressure dropped suddenly and was not able to supply your brain with oxygen. And so if you remember your blood pressure, when they measure it at the doctor's office, they give you it as 2 numbers, like 110 over 70 or 120 over 80. The 2 numbers mean they're called systole and diastole. Systole is the top number, the higher one. That's when your heart actually contracts and your blood pressure increases. That's the number. How high does it get? The second number is when your heart relaxes. What's the pressure in your blood vessels when your heart is relaxed? And so you want those numbers to be, balanced. The actual beating of our heart is controlled by special cells. It's called a pacemaker in our heart. It's a special portion that tells our heart when to beat. And so usually this part of our heart, it works properly, tells our heart to beat, once every second or so. It speeds up if we need more oxygen. As we exercise, our heart rate increases. When we're when we don't need a lot of energy, it slows down. Like at night, your heart rate probably goes down into the 50s. If you're exercising, your heart rate can go up to 170, 180, 190, 200 even. It adjusts based on our needs. Can measure our heartbeat through different ways. One is through an electrocardiogram, when you've seen like on movies and stuff, or if you have an Apple Watch, like a newer Apple Watch can actually measure your heart functioning using the Apple Watch. Kind of neat. I'll show you that in a minute. So this is our heart. Oops, not what I wanted. So this is our heart, and sort of labeled in a kind of diagram. So we'll stop after this slide. But again, the right side of our heart deals with deoxygenated blood. Typically, we draw it as blue to help us understand it. But is deoxygenated? It's not really blue. I know sometimes people think that, or even people have said that in the past. Deoxygenated blood is not really blue. It is slightly darker than oxygenated blood. Maybe it's like purpley, I guess, at most. But it's not really blue. But it helps us to understand if we draw it in blue. So the right side of our heart deals with deoxygenated blood, as we see here. Left side of the heart deals with oxygenated blood. Here we see the chambers. Now, why is this on the right? Why is that say right atrium? And when you look at it, it's left.
It's different in
You're facing it from
Yeah, we always label organs and anatomy based on like if it were in a person. Like which hand is this? For me,
Right arm.
it's my right hand. Even though when you look at me, it's on the left. The same is true of our heart. My right atrium is on my right side. It's on this side. Even though when you're looking into me, if you're dissecting me, cracked open my chest and lifting my heart, okay, looking at it from the outside, it's going to be on your left side. So that's why they're labeled like this. So this right side of the heart, it accepts all the blood from everywhere in your body that's given up its oxygen. It all comes into this chamber. It's called the right atrium. When the heart pumps, then goes into the right ventricle, it's called. That's the pumping chamber. When that contracts, where does this deoxygenated blood need to go? Where is it going to get oxygenated? In the lungs. And we could see their blood vessels bring that deoxygenated blood to the lungs. In our lungs, what happens to it? It gets oxygen, right? Because we breathe in, oxygen diffuses into that blood. Carbon dioxide diffuses out as we exhale. And now that blood can continue back to the heart again. But this time it goes to the other side. Now it's on the left side of the heart. It's coming in to the left atrium. Then it goes down into the left ventricle. Then it gets pumped out. And it can go to the rest of our body, to our brain, to our stomach, to our feet, to our legs, to our arms, everywhere. When it gets there, it gives up the oxygen to our body cells. It takes out their carbon dioxide, and then the process repeats. So it's like a figure eight, okay, where our circulation is continually providing oxygenated blood to all of our body tissue, and then receiving that deoxygenated blood back to send to our lungs to be kind of recharged. There's valves in our heart that make it so that blood only goes one way, right? Our blood should only be going from the atrium into the right ventricle, not in reverse. Every once in a while, though, in a person, those valves may not close all the way, or there may be a little bit of leaking of blood backwards. You know what that's called? It's called a heart murmur. Lots of people have them. lots of times they go away as people mature, as they get to be, in their 20s and 30s. My daughter had one. I think it's gone now. But the doctor can hear that. When they listen to a person's heart, they can hear that something's a little off and that there's some blood going sort of backwards. And so that's why it's called a murmur. They could hear it. Sometimes if these valves are if they're broken and not working well, they can be replaced. Can have replacement valves that they do heart surgery and put a new valve in here or here or here. So that does happen sometimes. This is the aorta. It's the largest blood vessel that leaves the heart, the largest artery. You can see it. Okay, this is the aorta. It sort of loops up and then goes behind the heart and goes down. And so each of these branches of the aorta, they go to different parts. One goes up to the brain on the left side and the right side. One goes down the arm, goes below the heart, goes into our torso, goes into both of our legs. So this aorta helps distribute that blood throughout all the different parts of the body. All right. Let's stop there for today.